Welcome to the ChangeMakers Podcast, brought to you by cityCURRENT and powered by Lipscomb and Pitts Insurance. This show shares personal stories and insight from those who are giving back and making a difference, so we can learn and do the same. We cover life lessons, business advice, passion, and purpose. Now here's our host, Jeremy Park.
Welcome to the ChangeMakers Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Park. We are in for a treat, a musical treat this time around. The fun of the ChangeMakers Podcast, as you know, is we get to dive into the personal stories of some of the Mid-South change makers. And we have a wonderful treat with us today, a good friend of ours, Ned Canty. He's the General Director for Opera Memphis. How are you doing, Ned?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing very well. So I feel like I should be singing. This should be an operatic of some sort. But anyway, let's start. So let's give a little bit of history for Ned as a child, a baby boy. So where did you grow up, Ned?
So I grew up in a town called Mamaroneck, New York. Anybody who's ever driven from New York to Hartford or New York to Boston has probably driven by the exit and wondered how the heck do you pronounce that name.
So say it again.
Mamaroneck, M-A-M, a bunch of other letters. So I grew up there, lived there till I was 18, college in D.C., and then spent a year living in London, a year traveling around the country with a small Shakespeare troupe, and then I've sort of bopped around a lot as a freelancer before landing in Memphis 6 years ago.
So talk about, obviously when you say Shakespeare, so theater, a little bit of theater as the background? Yeah,
so theater, my first love was theater. After coins and collecting coins was a big one early, but girls don't really go for guys who collect coins. That's a much more solitary pursuit. Whereas theater, I got to meet girls. So I got involved in theater in middle school. I was always a bit of a ham, the youngest kid, so you're allowed to be a little goofy. So theater was what I studied in college and what I studied in England, and my original goal was to be an actor. That's what I set out to be and was hoping to be. And I spent a year with this small Shakespeare troupe traveling around. It was actually the very first time I came to Memphis in 1993 was to do Romeo and Juliet at the Orpheum with this small troupe, the National Players. But I spent maybe 6 months after that in New York or outside of New York, staying with my family, auditioning for things, and very quickly I realized that the last thing the world needed was another pretty good actor. I enjoyed it. It was fun. But I did not like the lifestyle. I didn't like the auditioning, and I don't know. I didn't really. I felt like I was good at certain things and not very good at others, and I didn't have the patience to stick at it. And I also didn't. I tell young artists this all the time. There has to be a part of you that wants it more than anything. And as soon as you start thinking about other things you might do with your life, pursue one of them. And so I did that for a little bit, and then ended up, I spent a year as an assistant director at the McCarter Theater in Princeton, thanks to a friend I'd known in college. She got me in there, and that led me to another gig at another place. And around that time, I guess it was about 4 years after college, I was just starting to wonder whether there was a position for me at an ad firm somewhere, or maybe it was time to go back and get my PhD in folklore or something, even less useful than theater. So I was just starting to wonder that when I stumbled into opera in 1996, and that sort of took me on this path.
Before we get into that, I've got lots of questions just based on Mamaroneck and the whole history there. So let's start with what was your first role? Do you remember?
Yes. Second grade, I played a shepherd in the nativity play at St. John and Paul Elementary School. And I had a line. Not everybody had a line. I had a line after the angel appeared where I said, "Did you see that?" And then the shepherd number 2 or 3 said, "I thought it was a dream." But of course he never, even then I kind of remember he didn't say it well. I remember thinking, you should say, "I thought it was a dream." And it's like, "I thought it was a dream," or something, terrible line reading from this other second grader. But I do remember that there happened to be, from our local Gannett newspaper, there happened to be a reporter there. and he took a picture of all of us, and I just happened to be near the camera, so there was this picture of me, and there was, gosh, I feel like this is therapy. There was a bit of a fuss. My grandmother especially made a big fuss over it, and bought several issues of the newspaper to send
Proud
to other members of the family. Yeah,
right.
yeah. So that really was it until middle school. So I didn't do a lot of it, until 7th grade, and then I moved from the small, elementary school that only had one class per grade. I moved to a public middle school that had tons and tons of kids and a big theater program and did a lot of shows. And I honestly do not remember what led me to try out for my first one, but I did. And I played Mr. Fezziwig in A Christmas Carol.
Nice.
Yeah.
Hey, one line gets you into SAG and AFTRA. So these days, if you have one line in anything, you're good. You're a professional.
Yeah.
So talk about growing up in Mamaroneck, and when you talk about childhood, obviously you said you're the youngest. So how many siblings, and just give us kind of one fun memory of a tradition or something that stands out, just you and your family.
Oh gosh, I was the youngest. We lived in a neighborhood that was very walkable. There were a lot of kids around, so I don't know why I thought of this one. It's not my family; it's my friends. But we would get in a lot of trouble in various ways. And I remember that one of us, when we were about 9 or 10, one of us had gotten a whoopee cushion, and we were having a lot of fun. I mean, there's days of entertainment before the internet with a whoopee cushion. And one of us thought, wouldn't it be funny if we put it in the road and a car drove over it, and it would make an extra large sound, like the one a whoopee cushion normally makes, except much, much bigger. So we did. We inflated it. We put it in the middle of the street, and a passing car drove by, ran over it, and of course it exploded with a huge bang. And the poor person driving the car thought that their tire had blown out, so they skidded and started trying to brake, and we all just scattered to the winds. I don't think any of us saw each other for a week or two after that, because we were all sure that we were going to get busted for it. But I think oh man. I have a lot of great memories. We had a terrific house.
So how many brothers, sisters?
I have older sister, older brother, and an older sister who is not with us anymore. So yeah, that was. But it was a great. My oldest sister Anne is 9 years older than me, and Jimmy is my closest brother. He's 3 years older than me. So the nice thing was there was this big span. And, my sister and I were pretty close when I was young, and I was like a fun kid to have around. And then as I became a teenager and a pain in the neck, we lost touch. But so we've always been a pretty close family. My family all still live either in Manhattan or just outside of New York. In my brother's case. We did, in terms of family traditions, I think the biggest one, the one that really set the stage for everything else, was Thanksgiving. We had a house that was good for entertaining, and my grandfather was a bartender and a restaurant host when my mom was growing up. And
that makes it nice.
Yeah, my uncle was a bartender during. He was a fireman and a bartender and a lot of other things, but so she was always very into hospitality, and while our immediate family is small, we have a ton of cousins. I'm related to half of Long Island, at least the fire department and the police department I'm related to.
At least you're safe.
Yeah, exactly. So Thanksgiving was always at our house, and it was all of the first cousins, the second cousins. It was friends of my mother's. It was she taught for a long time on the college level, university level. So if there were foreign students who didn't know what Thanksgiving was, or people who couldn't get home to other family, we would always bring them in. So we had maybe 50 or 60 people at Thanksgiving time, and it was just one of those great traditions. There are a lot of cousins that I saw them once a year. This was the time that I saw them, and now that my mom lives in a small apartment and can't do that anymore, much to her dismay, we do still. Try to keep in touch, but it's a lot harder without that tradition, without that sort of central place. And although I should say my mom in case she listens to this, hi Mom, she probably will. This year, the apartment complex she lives in Manhattan, there are a lot of folks there who are older, who don't have family anymore, or can't travel well, and so she organized this year a dinner, a Thanksgiving meal for all of those people in one of the rec rooms there, and had 40 or 50 people there. So she really enjoyed that, and that hospitality gene, that desire to bring people together over food and drink is a strong one in my family, and especially with my mom.
So to me, it's cool to hear these stories, especially around Thanksgiving and the holidays, because as a child, even on our end, you have these memories of hanging out with your aunts and uncles and going over and spending all this time with the cousins, and you have these memories, and as a kid you don't really appreciate it, but then all of a sudden as you get older and you realize there's unfortunately some of your loved ones have passed, but the dynamics change, and so you lose that. And I think as you get older, you have a great appreciation looking back for just those fond memories of even just running around and playing together with your cousins, and sitting down and sitting in somebody's lap watching a football game or whatever it may be.
Or Wizard of Oz, or I want to say it was the Wizard of Oz. There were certain movies that would always come on. There were certain games we would play, flashlight tag, when it got dark, things like that. Yeah, I mean, all of those things were a big part of it. And we do, many of them are in the New York area, and weddings are still going on, and in fact the next generation is now going to be starting to get married pretty soon. So we do see each other, and I think because of that history, it's always a very enjoyable time, and it means that you don't need to spend a lot. You can catch up, you can share what's been going on, but there's never any kind of awkwardness over not being in touch or not seeing each other. Yeah, we my immediate family, as I mentioned, is pretty small, but my great-grandmother had 6 boys and a girl and then another boy, I believe. So lots and lots of cousins. All of them grew up on one block in the Bronx. It's something straight out of The Godfather, where everybody knew each other and everybody was running in and out of each other's houses growing up. So that sense of having a tight-knit family is a big thing. And my mom is still just a great conduit of information. I always know what my brother and sister are up to from talking to my mom as much as from talking to them.
The connector.
Yeah, she's the original Facebook. She is analog Facebook.
What's one bit of advice, life lesson, something along those lines, favorite quote, something that your parents kind of ingrained in you?
Oh my gosh. I think the philosophy, I don't know that it was a quote or anything that, it wouldn't be something to point to, but, both my parents were psychologists. So my father was a clinical psychologist. My mom taught and then worked in the business world for a long time as a consultant. You didn't stand a chance then, did you? You weren't thinking anything by your parents. No, you really couldn't. But the nature of that, the way of looking at the world that you get from growing up there is, in some ways, I think, why I ended up doing what I do. Because as a director, really your main job is to figure out, why is this character doing what they're doing? Why would they make this choice rather than another choice? So having grown up being encouraged to think about why people do the things they do is what I think definitely influenced that. But I think the bigger part of it is that it's just a great habit to be in life, because it's very easy to think that the person who just cut you off is a terrible person and deserves whatever comes to them. And rather than thinking either, gosh, I wonder what kind of day they had that they're being so aggressive, or, my father would always say, well, maybe he's a brain surgeon on his way to find a patient on the table, And I'm guessing there aren't that many brain surgeons, in that situation, but that idea of trying to look at the world through somebody else's lenses, try to think about their point of view. Yeah, shoes. And it was so ingrained in things, and again, you're 8 years old and some kid was mean to you, and the question, it was never like, oh, so and so is just a little rotten stinker. It was, well, why do you think they said that? And it's impacted everything in my life. And I know my wife sometimes finds it a little annoying, because you spend too much time trying to go there instead of just listening and saying, yes, I know, dear, they're a terrible human being. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that happened to you. But I've learned, 16 years of marriage, 17, and I'm starting to get there.
Deep thoughts.
Yes.
With Ned Canty. So talk about London, and then we'll talk about Opera Memphis. But talk about London. I mean, that's got to be an amazing trip to do. I mean,
Yeah.
Shakespeare. I mean, when you look at just historically where the theater really began, and to think that you had a chance to go there, to go to London, go to England, I mean, that's got to be a cool trip.
It was. I got a fellowship to go and study, and I could have gone almost anywhere, but I really specifically wanted to study Shakespeare, and so London just seemed like the place to go. And it was a 1-year acting program that was kind of open to anyone. You didn't need any specific qualifications. It was you had to audition and do certain things, but. We also had some family in London that had migrated. Around the time my grandfather came to America, he had first cousins who went to Wales, England, and Canada. They all just sort of, scattered around. So we had family there as well, which was it was nice to establish contact with them. I think the best part of living in London was the theater. I lived actually at a YMCA. That was only a couple of blocks away from the Barbican, which is where the Royal Shakespeare Company performs. There's a short subway ride from the Royal National Theatre. I have a stack, I don't know how many programs high of all the shows that I saw while I was there. And as a student, it was dirt cheap. I mean, it was subsidized. So I think it was something like £5, which, at the time would have been almost $10. But even so, just dirt cheap to get, not just seats in the gods. I mean, this was whatever the best seat available was. So,
Wow.
I got to see things. I saw Kenneth Branagh do Hamlet, and not just the regular Hamlet, but the full uncut 4.5-hour version of Hamlet, and got to do that for that same amount of money in a really amazing seat. I don't know what it would have cost. So I got to do all of that. On the other hand, London is full of British people, which was a bit of a downside, but I got used to some of them. But I will say, going to England to study Shakespeare as an American, everybody there thinks they have to speak very slowly and explain it all to you. They have a sense of ownership over the work that I found a little off-putting. Even though I was the only one who had actually in the program had actually studied Shakespeare, I was the only one who could explain the War of the Roses to the people whose history it was. But so it was, I'll be honest, it was a mixed bag. I think the best part of it was finding myself in a position where I was identified first as an American and then as everything else about me. And, when you live here, you are identified first as whatever, as a man, as going to whatever college. But living abroad, you are first an American, and you are responsible for anything any American does or has ever done. And that is a great point of view. I don't know that you need to spend 6 months somewhere, and I would put that up there with, spend at least a week somewhere where you not only don't speak the language, but it's a different alphabet, so that you just have no idea where you are. And the sort of the humility that gives you, but also I never felt more American. I never felt more connected to the country than when I came back. And I do think that I didn't appreciate what it meant to be an American until I had lived abroad and traveled a bit. It really allowed me to put it into context and enjoy it. So that was a great part of the whole thing.
I think what's interesting is looking at your backstory. And these are all things that part of the fun to me of doing the ChangeMakers podcast is I learned so much as well. Half of this stuff I had no clue. Like, I'm genuinely just sitting here. There's no questions. I'm just throwing questions at you want to learn. And what's interesting, though, is when you take those experiences, these are all the very things that you're bringing to Memphis and doing in a very creative way. And when you look at not only the character development side, but even some of the first conversations you and I had many, many years ago is how to make opera relevant in today's society and putting yourself in the shoes of others. Very much like what you're talking about is all of these formative experiences with your childhood over in England. These are all the very things and ideas that you're bringing right here to Memphis. So let's talk about Opera Memphis. Give us a little bit of your role with Opera Memphis. You're bringing in world-class productions, talent. You're coming off of sold-out shows with an amazing cast. My family and I were just blown away. Give us a little bit of kind of a teaser for Opera Memphis and what's going on right now.
Gosh, we're in the middle of a strategic planning process, and I told a colleague in New York last week that it's sort of like having your 50th birthday on New Year's Eve of the millennium. You sort of are thinking about everything that's come before, and really thinking about what does the future look like. And I would say in some ways with Opera Memphis, the fun part for me has been, coming here to take over a company that had a long and proud history, but had hit a rough patch, as had a lot of arts groups around the country. We lost something like 23 operas in the past, in this century. So coming there, but then finding a city that was progressing so fast that really we kind of had to run to keep up, but that shaped a lot of the decisions we made, a lot of the choices that we made, because really every opera company, when you're talking about regional opera, regional arts, Ballet Memphis, Memphis Symphony Orchestra, Opera Memphis, Playhouse on the Square, all of these groups, a part of what we need to do is figure out what is it that we do that our audience not only wants from an entertainment perspective, but needs or craves, or what is it that we can do to help. And for opera, I'm as a director, as an opera director, I think I'm considered by some of my peers, at least other directors my age, to be a little bit square in my taste, because what I love is a good story, and what I love, this is another thing that I think my mother gave me is this sense of, I grew up in the Bronx in, a 1 block radius, and that was my world. And it's not that I grew up in the Bronx and someone else grew up in London or Mumbai, so that makes us different. It's we all grew up in cities, and that makes us the same. And, opera specializes in taking these individual stories of one person and making them universal, making them apply to everyone, so that the story of, somebody falling in love and being afraid that the person they love is not loving them back. I mean, all of these things that are kind of basic human emotions, opera is able to universalize those. And I think that what that means is it has the power to unite people, so that everybody who is watching a show is having the same experience, feeling the same emotions, and that is an incredibly powerful thing. There's a reason why dictators throughout the centuries go after art, because it reminds people of their similarities, and the strength of that to help move a city forward, to help to in some small way to make connections between individuals, to help somebody walk a couple miles in someone else's shoes, to see the world from their perspective. I feel like theater can do that. I feel like film can do that. But for me, I've never worked in an art form that does it better than opera does, because of the emotional context. I may not be a 16-year-old geisha. I'm not. But when I go to Madame Butterfly and I watch this piece, I know what she's feeling, and I feel what she's feeling, and that's just, it's not to get like weird or gooey about it, but it's almost magical. Like it is this connection that goes beyond logic or words, and just goes to the sort of heart of what it means to be a human being. The primal nature of music, the banging on drums of rhythm, is not only about matching our heartbeat, but it's about everybody in the tribe having the same heartbeat. So it's from the very beginning of music, as human beings, it's all been about the tribe coming together. So, and there's never been a time in history where it was not a good thing for the tribe to come together. But I think that today, especially with, digital, everything is fantastic. I'm a big digital guy. I love the latest gadgets. I live online. I have way too many gadgets. Just ask my wife. However, it does lead to a sense of disconnect. And even when you think you're paying attention fully to something, often you're not quite. I mean, last night my wife asked me if I could take the dog to the groomer this morning on my way to work. And I was, doing something on my phone. I was like, yeah, sure. And she actually hadn't asked me this morning. She'd asked me for next week if I could do it. But I only heard a portion of it because my mind was divided. And I think that that's happening more and more in our lives, that our minds are being divided, our attention is being divided. And these times when we can fully commit ourselves to something, whether it's a movie, whether it's a symphony, a play, an opera, and experience it with everyone around us and laugh at the same time and cry at the same time, it scratches an itch that all of us have that often we don't even know that we have. We don't even recognize the gap. Sports does a fantastic job of this. It's all of us in the arts world these days look at sports and say, how are they able to basically put on these events in which everybody is together, everybody is a unit, and nobody cares about anything else other than what's happening in that moment. And, what can we learn from them to create those experiences? It's why, having a team like the Grizzlies is not just about the economic impact. It's about the pride, and it's about having this, civic commons where we all come together and cheer as one, and all of that stuff is important. And all of it for me, opera kind of found me. I didn't find opera. And since another thing I think that was never specifically said but was sort of inherent in the way I was brought up is, doing what you want to do is great, but really doing something that you're good at, that you can do well and feel like you're contributing without those things, it's a very dissatisfying life. It's for good or for ill, money was never the measure of success. Yeah. And it's funny, I went to a Jesuit high school, and a lot of the guys that I went to high school with work on Wall Street or run hedge funds or can make $1 million donations to cultural organizations. And my mom mentioned one of these guys once, and I said, oh, yeah, he was in my class. We took, such and such class together. And she said, what class did he take that you didn't take? But that being said, I think that but
I think that's also, too, you have kind of the mainstream view of success. And to your point, money doesn't buy happiness.
Yeah.
And for what you're doing. And I think it also, too, people understand when you talk about your role, general director, you oversee both sides. So you're overseeing the business office, the management, making sure that all the numbers match up, but you're also managing the artistic side as well, the shows.
Yeah.
So that in and of itself, it takes a rare breed to be able to do both, to understand all the show dynamics, which clearly is your background, and then the budgets and the management, the business. And so I think you get to see both sides, which is a rare opportunity. Share though, I think everything you talked about, you exude this passion, right? And obviously that's what it takes to make anything a success, is the passion. And even you said, you've got to be able to love what you do to be able to make it. If you're thinking about something else, chances are you're not going to make it. You don't want it bad enough, right? So talk about innovation, because I think you've done some really creative things here. You talk about 30 Days of Opera, where you're taking opera out into the streets. You're demystifying that it's not the large lady with the Viking hat singing opera. These are very, very fit and trim and beautiful men and women out there singing. And so you've done... Opera doesn't suck is one of the things that you've got, as a program. But you've got these really creative things that you're doing that bring opera to the mainstream, that engage youth, that engage people who might or might not have ever seen an opera. And you're literally bringing it right to them, saying, this is what opera is. This is how it's not only the drum beat, the heartbeat that brings us together, but it also allows you to see other sides of yourself, other sides of others. You get to walk in somebody else's shoes. So you're taking them on this journey. And I think that's why, as I alluded, you've had sellout shows now, which when you think about opera in many cities, that's a massive struggle.
Yeah.
And yet you're doing things here based on your ability to be a part of the fabric of the community that are making it a success.
I think the blessing for me is that I didn't grow up with opera. I didn't come from an opera background, and so I don't think about it in a very precious way. I came to it in my mid-20s and, had a lot of biases and misconceptions about what it would be like. Not that there aren't things about opera that are a little hidebound that need to change on a national level. And, just last week, I'm on the Opera America board now, the board of directors for the National Opera Service Organization. And I think I don't know if I like it, but I think I'm getting a reputation as a bit of a bomb thrower because there are certain things that I do think as a field, the more you love opera, the easier it is to lose track of certain things. It's very easy to say, oh, such and such person, in this viral video, well, they're not really an opera singer. Well, who cares? They're singing an opera aria and they're moving people, and it's a gateway, it's an entry point. I think that the ability to look at everything as a step towards a deeper engagement or a step towards something, better or stronger is important. For me, an ability to say, for years, for decades, the way that you raised money in the opera world was to talk about excellence. And I think that probably goes with all arts, but I've only ever run an opera company and a TV festival, but that's a totally different thing. So but that idea of excellence is kind of insidious, because when you're talking about a meal, there's really no such thing as the best meal in Memphis. There may be a meal that the largest number of people like, but maybe some of them can afford it and some of them can't. For some of them, it's an everyday thing. For some of them, it's their Valentine's Day or anniversary dinner. Or maybe for some of them, when you're on the road and the thing that you need is just that, or for me, coming back from being away for a long time, and that first pulled pork sandwich at Central or that first Gus's fried chicken is a reminder of like, oh, right, okay, now I'm home, So that sense of quality is always something that has lenses. It's always interpreted. So, and often the people making the decisions, the example I use a lot is wine, and I think I've used it with you. So you can talk about $1,000 bottle of wine, but I'm betting that the vast majority of people who love wine and enjoy wine, maybe even collect wine, that if you gave them a $900 bottle of wine and a $1,000 bottle of wine and you asked them which one was which, blind taste test, I bet it would be about 50-50.
Well, and you could probably put a $20 bottle of wine with most of us, so we probably would never know the difference.
Absolutely. So that question of, where is the money going? What are you paying for? And really 30 Days of Opera came out of that. And it's not to say that what we're doing with that isn't quality. It is to say, like, well, they're singing, great singers. The one thing we never skimp on is people. We get the most talented people we can because everything else is icing. So you get a very talented singer singing something beautifully. Is it a little bit better if she's wearing a period costume? Yeah, maybe. And she's in a theater and you're sitting in a comfortable seat and there's some lights and it's part of a show. Each of those things adds something. And you put an orchestra in the pit. Each of these things makes the experience better. But that isn't to say that the only one that is of quality is the one that is the utmost, the utmost one. I mean, heck, I was buying a car 2 days ago, a used car, but like you start looking at trim lines and you start thinking like, well, how much is that backup camera really worth to me? All of these things, it's never a question of quality being the only thing worthwhile is the thing that costs the absolute most money. And often the thing that is the most satisfying is the thing that doesn't cost the most money. And certainly I've tasted wines that I know are very expensive and thought, or I mean, oh God, single malt scotches, you taste some of those and you think, oh my God, this bottle costs $300. I don't want to spit it out because that's rude, but I don't want to drink the rest of it,
Well, but the funny thing is Johnny Pitts, he's the co-CEO of Lipscomb and Pitts, he kind of shares an analogy all the time. It's like you get to the point where you've got the water filled, or the glass is full of water, and yet you just keep pouring more over. And so the point is you get people satisfied, and then what's enough is enough, right? Yeah. And you keep adding more that really can't be enjoyed, or they might enjoy it but not as much. And so, I mean, that's a great business application in general, is just like, what are the things that are going to create a valuable experience but not necessarily blow your budget, go through the roof, because in the end, and I love what you're saying, because I think that's where people get caught, is they try to add so much. They try to go so big right out of the gates, versus what you're saying is, wait a second, no, we want world-class singers, yes, but we're willing to put them right out in the streets and showcase, because we believe in the power of opera, pure and simple, and we don't need to stick to this rigid routine of having it in this place with this sort of dynamic. I mean, you can take it literally anywhere and everywhere and prove that this is something for everyone.
Yeah. And every year we have singers who have sung on major stages throughout the world, the Met, La Scala, Chicago Lyric, you name it. And they'll come here and they'll do an event with us, a free event, where they're singing 10 feet from someone, and they're looking in that person's eyes, and they're seeing that person's response. They're seeing them hear the music and feel the music. And to a person, they value that experience higher than another one. Another analogy that's very useful is the film analogy. An actor might get paid $20 million to do the big budget action movie, but then they'll get paid scale to do an independent project because they're passionate about it. They know that maybe it won't have as wide an audience, but for the audience that goes, it will be a powerful experience. And those are the value propositions that in terms of getting world-class people here. Singers come here because they believe in the art form, and it's not a job for any of them. I mean, at the highest level, opera singers make a very comfortable living, although, when you factor in living in New York, as many of them do, like, all of a sudden that is a very different set of economics. The quality of life for the same amount of money in New York is very different than Memphis and a lot of other cities. But none of them are doing it for that. They're doing it because they believe in the ability of this music to move people, to have people that they believe on some level that somebody having heard this song, that their life is a tiny bit better, a grain of sand better on the beach of their life, but hey, it's a grain of sand. And that over time, those experiences mean something. And I do think that we get a lot of singers who come here who will come to sing because, for them, opera always in America has had this, there's the art form, and then there's everything that surrounds the art form. And, historically, opera, because of all the elements, there's the visual element, there's the singers, there's the orchestra, there's all this stuff. So it is, of all of the art forms on a kind of, if you averaged, shows out, of all the art forms, opera is the most expensive because it involves all the things, everything's in it, right? What that's meant over time is that in a lot of cities, opera was something, because of the price tag associated with doing it a particular way, it was considered the domain of the wealthy or of people who wanted to be perceived that way. There was a sort of social climbing aspect to it, and that's in every city in America. And that need for, most of the people I meet these days, younger people, they don't need somebody to tell them that they are worth existing. They don't need somebody to say, like, oh, they're sophisticated or they're a part of society. They just don't care. So those trappings really don't mean a lot anymore. So what we're left with is what's on the stage. And when you really just focus on that, what you find is that the experience that a young singer 2 years out of school who is passionate about it, who wants to connect, is worth 10 singers who've been doing it for 30 years and are collecting a paycheck, no matter what their quote-unquote quality is. I mean, none of those things really have meaning, and again, I would challenge anybody to take any aesthetic experience, any sense experience in their lives that they've had many times, whether it's food or drink or a party or a sunset, whatever, and figure out what were your favorites of those. And I would be shocked if every one of your favorites was the one that was the most expensive. It's just not human nature. In fact, sometimes it's the one that you get for free, the one that sneaks in through the back door, that is the one you value the most because you never saw it coming. And of course, for 30 days, that's a big part of it. It's the number of people who've told me when we sing on the corner of Parkway and Sam Cooper, I was coming back from work, I was all stressed out, I stopped at the red light and there's some singer singing, Tosca at me, and it just made me feel better about the day because I live in a city where I can stop at a red light and there's an opera singer 5 feet away,
Right.
And so, those sorts of things. When you get into that, the question of quality, what is the quality of that experience? There's no way to quantify that. I mean, you can't get into it. So I think, circling all the way back to your original question, I think it is looking at any kind of experience from that point of view and thinking of all of the different things that opera can be, from one person with a piano or even a cappella to 12 singers and a chorus of 60 and an orchestra of 85, and sets and costumes and lights and all that stuff. All of those things have value. All of those things cost a certain amount of money. And my job is to make sure that as many people as possible in Memphis have access to an experience somewhere on that spectrum that is meaningful for them, that's enjoyable for them, that makes sense financially for them, whether it's from free to paying sticker price for a ticket, and not just think about what we do as the pinnacle experience, which fully produced opera is the pinnacle experience of opera. But, sitting in the second roll of a Billy Joel concert or maybe on stage with them is the pinnacle Billy Joel concert. It doesn't mean that you don't still go when you're up in the nosebleeds, because it still has value.
Absolutely. Well, I think there's so many lessons in that to unpack, especially for businesses and other arts organizations. It just goes back to the core experience and the intimate relationship that you ultimately form one-on-one. So let's go ahead and switch over to our favorite session, which is the lightning round.
Okay.
I'm still going to have to push Andrew to come up with some fancy thing we can insert where it's like boom, some crazy noise. Right.
Lightning round.
The lightning round.
Lightning round.
But anyway, it's just a bunch of short questions, short answers, fun chance to just know you a little bit deeper and have fun with this. So the first one is, what's a recent book that you've read?
I just read a book called Frida and Alice Forever. That's about an incident in Memphis history of a young woman who fell in love with another young woman and wanted to run away with her. And when their families discovered and forbade them from seeing each other, this other young woman slit the throat of the first young woman on the docks of Memphis, on those cobblestone docks, and was imprisoned for it. This is in the late 1880s, I want to say. I forget the exact year. And it was the trial of the century. The eyes of America were on Memphis because of this, bizarre crime that happened. And I read it because it's the subject of one of our next opera commissions. And in fact, even at the time, Sarah Bernhardt, the French actress, traveled the world, visited this woman in prison here in Memphis when she was here performing because she thought it would make an amazing play, even at that time. So the book was recommended to me, and it is a fascinating read, if for nothing else than just learning a little bit about what Memphis was like in 1890 whatever, especially for young women, who maybe couldn't leave the house and had to find ways to entertain themselves.
That's definitely the first curveball in a book.
Yeah, sorry, that's.
Well, and how about that for a teaser for a show coming up? Nice. You got double on that one.
Yeah.
All right. So, what's something you like to do to relax?
Video games.
What's a favorite? Any certain favorite? I know my youngest son would be like Rocket League, the car game. He's big into Halo right now. He could list off 10 million Xbox and video games.
I like role playing games. I like ones that have a very complex plot. I'm fascinated by, I would say that this sort of interactive narrative, this branching narrative where depending on what you do as a player, the story ends differently. I mean, that goes right back to the Choose Your Own Adventure books that I loved as a kid. I think that that is something that video games do that no other art form does, and I'm fascinated by that, and I'm trying to learn from it in some ways, but I also it's the complexities of it relax my mind when combined with the sort of hand-eye coordination as well. It's one of the few things that allows me to just kind of get lost in something else. So I find it very relaxing in that way. The Mass Effect games are favorites of mine, and the newest Mass Effect is coming out March 21st. and I have it pre-ordered on Amazon, but it's going to be getting there just as we're preparing to go into the theater for our Midtown Opera Festival. So for about 2 weeks, I won't be able to even open it up, because otherwise I won't sleep at all. I barely sleep during the festival as it is. But
so are you one of those that has to play it all the way through, like you won't sleep until you finish the game?
I mean, I'll sleep, but I will come home and I will start the game, and my wife is very patient with me, and I will probably not get enough sleep. I have saved a couple of vacation days to put in for after the festival.
That's awesome.
It is, I mean, it's, I've worked in different fields, theater and television and opera, and when I was worked at the television festival, there was a lot of stuff with, new video content, YouTube, things like that. We're just starting. And all of it is enjoyable. All of it has value. And again, I think that idea, that quirk of the mind that, kind of makes me say, oh, this is kind of like this. So that what I see in most video games is, I see the hero's journey, and I see the same kinds of stories, the same kind of iconic characters that, that the Greeks wrote myths about, and that we wrote operas about, and that now they're writing video games about it. Sometimes it is the exact same characters, but that
so you're doing research, is what
I am. Yes, that's what it is. It's all doing research, but all of that. Anything in your life feeds back into what you put on the stage, and how you approach putting it on the stage. And that is why, some of the operas we do are world premieres. Some of them were written 300 years ago. But I would say that the fact that our lens is always shifting means that looking at a piece that was written just before the French Revolution is brewing and saying, wow, how does that connect to today? How does that, the ability of audiences to do that, of artists to do that, is why we keep doing these pieces, because it's also sort of sometimes a great relief to realize that whatever you might think about anything today or 10 years from now, 10 years ago, about good or bad, especially bad, like you think it's bad and then you realize like, oh, actually, the time of Nero was far worse. That was not nearly as good, but that connection to realize like, oh, actually 300 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, most people just cared about finding somebody to love, and spending time with them. The things that are those core human drives and identities. That is a great relief, and I see that in video games as much as I see it in anything else.
Well, at some point it'll be a whole other conversation, but I want to ask, this isn't the question, but I would just want to ask at this point naturally, do you feel like you play a video game when you're directing an opera, up there with the controller and directing the people? But I'll take that later. So
more like action figures, my action figures I would play with,
Where do you like to go for vacation?
Well, I'll be on. It's hopefully my wife won't hear this one. So I've had this bad habit since I got here of using my vacation weeks to go and direct at other companies. Our last vacation, we were able to snag a couple of days and go and visit. My wife's family is in Virginia, and so we met up in around the Pigeon Forge area and spent a couple of days. She actually spent a week. I spent a couple of days. We've really enjoyed twice now. We've gone down to New Orleans for short visits. We love that. We're big foodies. Historically, if I could choose to go anywhere for a week in August, I'd probably choose Maine. I taught at a summer camp there for a while, and I have some friends there. I went there as a kid a few times. And there's just something about it. There's something about the ocean there and the woods and the mountains all close by. And I think that, for me, is my favorite, even though I haven't been there in a couple of decades almost.
So the last question before we give everybody your contact information is, what do you hope, obviously you're creating it literally every single day, but what do you hope your legacy is going to be here in Memphis?
Wow. It's funny, that legacy idea. I think, my wife and I don't have kids, and so this is one of those things that you actually think about a lot. And I think one of the few areas in which I diverge a little bit from a lot of my family is that, part of that family connection that we have means that you think about your legacy in terms of your kids. And my wife and I don't. And so really we think about our legacy in terms of how do you make the world a better place when you're gone? How do you leave a better world? I think that if I could choose, it would be, I mean, on the most basic level, leaving behind a healthy, flexible, nimble opera company that can adapt to whatever the needs and conditions of the city are. I think more than that, I do think that the approach that we're taking in Memphis is having an impact on companies across the country. And what I would say is if I can move the needle even a little bit and remind people that once a story exists, whether it's an opera or a ballet or a play or whatever, once somebody's written that story, in a certain sense, it belongs to everybody. It belongs to every human being. And the more barriers we put between people and the stories that they could enjoy, that could illuminate their lives and make sense of their lives, the more of a disservice we're doing. And that if I can have moved the needle even a little bit towards getting opera or the arts in any way to think less about what is the pinnacle experience for the most, for the most fanatic audience we have, and more about what is the greatest number of people we can reach in a meaningful, impactful way to improve their lives. If I can move that needle a bit, I will be quite happy with whatever I leave behind.
Very nice. Tell everyone where they can learn more about Opera Memphis. How can they connect in with you? What are the easy ways? You mentioned social media. You're big on social media. So what are the ways they can connect with you on social media as well?
operamemphis.org is our website. I'm Ned at operamemphis.org. At a certain point, I'll have to stop giving that out, but it's still controlled enough. So I'm always happy to talk to people, always sort of eager to hear from people, in fact. Social media, my Twitter handle is poi la parola, is an Italian phrase. It's an opera in joke. I wouldn't even bother to explain it, but it's very funny if you're a fan of Salieri, Mozart's nemesis. But the Opera Memphis is also on Twitter, and our Opera Memphis Facebook page. I tweet both. My personal Twitter is Poi la Parola, but I also do the Opera Memphis Twitter.
And spell that one.
POILAPAROLA, and it means then the word. The great controversy in opera is, are the words more important or the music more important? And Salieri once wrote an opera called Prima la musica, poi la parola. First the music, then the words. That was his answer to it. And as a director, I mainly deal with words, so this was sort of my little joke, which very few people get.
I was about to say, I know the handle because I follow you and retweet you and everything else. Yeah. But I didn't know what it meant.
What is this? Poila, pair,
exactly.
ola.
See, I learned so much. How to pronounce words, how to spell them correctly. So all the above.
I probably should change it at some point. I just haven't gotten around to it.
Hey, nothing wrong with that. It makes you ask the question, right?
Yes.
Easy conversation starter.
That is true.
Well, Ned, greatly appreciate all you do. Thanks for being a change maker, not only you personally, but with Opera Memphis. Really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing your story with us. So thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to Lipscomb and Pitts for all you guys do. I mean, you guys have been the torchbearer, the sort of head bicycle at the pack for all of us for a while now, and it's a great. You set a great bar that you keep raising, and that's the most fabulous thing because all of us who are in the know keep trying to match it.
Well, I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the ChangeMakers Podcast, produced by cityCURRENT and powered by Lipscomb & Pitts Insurance. To learn more about our guests and to share your stories of others leading by example, visit us online at citycurrent.com. Connect with us online using @cityCURRENT or follow the conversation using the hashtag ChangeMakers. Now, think big, start small, and act now. Be a change maker.